Welcome to another edition of Around the Table with Stacy Smith. The election was yesterday, and so what better time to talk about politics? Here are our analysts for today, as always. They consist of former Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett. Mr. Corbett served, of course, as governor of Pennsylvania, but not only that, he also served as state attorney general and also the U.S. attorney for the Western District of Pennsylvania. Mr. Corbett right now teaches law at Duquesne University and is with a local law firm as well. Across the table from Mr. Corbett, we find the former Democratic Party chairman for the state of Pennsylvania. That would be Jim Byrne. Jim also served as the president of Allegheny County Council and as mayor of Millvale for many years. Jim right now practices law in the city of Pittsburgh. We go back across the table, and around the table, we find Keith Schmidt. Keith began work in politics back in the Reagan presidency years. He also was the state director for former Pennsylvania Republican Senator Rick Santorum. He also worked on Santorum's presidential campaign in 2012. Right now, Keith has his own consulting firm here in Pittsburgh and uses it statewide. And then finally, back on the other side of the table, we find none other than what I like to call the great philosopher of Around the Table. That would be Joe Mistic. Joe's background is varied as well, and especially in state Democratic politics. Joe also served as deputy mayor of the city of Pittsburgh. He teaches law right now at Duquesne University and also has a column that you can read on politics and life in the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, I guess is the proper name for it. Gentlemen, thank you all for being with us once again on Around the Table. It was a very historic win yesterday for the Democrats, especially in the city of Pittsburgh. That was the first time that a Black man has ever been elected mayor of Pittsburgh, a Black of either gender, as a matter of fact. So I'm going to start with Keith Schmidt and ask you, from your perspective as a Republican, how significant is this election of Ed Gainey?
Well, there was certainly no red wave in the city of Pittsburgh, and nor did we expect there to be a red wave in the city of Pittsburgh. It's largely a Democratic, overwhelmingly registered Democratic city. The Republican Party has not made great strides in registration. So pretty much these races have been decided in my lifetime in the primary. But the significant thing, other than the fact that as one of the oldest cities in America, this is the first time we've had a Black mayor is certainly significant. But also significant in our lifetime, I don't think as they wrestle within their own parties and primaries, they've ever displaced a sitting Democratic mayor in my lifetime. The closest they came, I think, was when Bob O'Connor gave a run for his money to Tom Murphy, running for his third term. But other than that, the decision that was made in the spring, I think, has to open the eyes to a degree of our new mayor. He has to also look at the tea leaves as to why he was successful. I think when he looks at those tea leaves, Stacy, I think you're going to find Ed Gainey's administration to be much more hands-on. I think you're going to see a much more visible mayor, sort of in the style of Sophie Masloff or Bob O'Connor. I think you're going to see a return to local issues, parks and neighborhoods and street cleaning and all the things it takes to run an effective city. But the most important thing is I think he needs a barometer for where he's beginning. And I think he could do that with his transition team. These are difficult times for urban America. They were difficult before the pandemic. They're even going to be more difficult in the next few years. So I think what he can do by putting together a strong transition team is to at least be able to have a starting point and be able to articulate to the people of Pittsburgh, here's where we begin, and let's build upon this a better, brighter future for the residents of the city of Pittsburgh.
All right, Keith, thank you. Jim Byrne, as former state Democratic Party chairman, your take on Ed Gainey's election.
Well, echoing what Keith said and getting to a very significant point, I think that Keith made, is you're going to see back to basics mayoring from Mayor-elect Gainey. Congratulations to Ed Gainey on his victory last night. Mayors sink or swim based on the retail component of their respective administrations. Mayor Peduto lost touch with that essential fundamental of staying in office. A lot of what he did on an international level to bring in some business and some big things was commendable. Can't take that away from him. But he took his eye off the basics. Mayoring 101. I want to see a police car when I look out my window. I want my street to be paved. I want my trash picked up on time. I want a quiet neighborhood. I want to be able to know that my kids can get to and from school. I want the basic fundamentals of living in a community. Mayor Peduto took his eye off of that. That's not Mr. Gainey's style. I mean, he's been a retail politician his entire career. Expect to see him do more of that. The big transition for Mayor-elect Gainey will be moving from being a career legislator into the executive seat. That's a whole different dynamic. He will get the credit for things that other people do, and he will get credit for things that he does, deservedly, but he will also get the blame for things that other people do. That's a dynamic you see as an executive that you do not see as a legislator. He'll need to be prepared for that, because he's coming into a city that needs a lot of work, especially on the front of the perception of the police. He needs to right that perception, and he needs to engage with that perception and fix any misperceptions that exist. Ed is smart enough to surround himself with brilliant people, good advisors, good staff, good consultants, good kitchen cabinet. He will do all of those things, and he will hit the ground running. So he will learn from the mistakes of his predecessor, learn from the positives of the O'Connors and the Sophie Maslows and the Dick Caligiuris, and he will build, I believe, an impressive administration. We all wish him the best of luck.
All right, thank you, Jim. Governor and Joe, I'm going to change the topic slightly here, because one of you was an elected official and assumed office, and Joe, you were the right-hand person for Sophie Maslow. Now, she was not elected the first time she stepped into the mayor's office as mayor, but what kind of changes can we expect immediately from someone who assumes the mayor's office? And Joe, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think echoing my colleagues who've already spoken, both Jim and Keith, this mayor does have to get back to basics. And as Jim said, if you fix the potholes and plow the streets and pick up the garbage, you could be mayor forever. And the people that are your constituents will give you then the ability to do some other things on a larger policy basis. But if you take care of business for them, they'll trust you, and you'll be able to go off and perhaps embrace some more comprehensive or more wide-reaching projects. But you do have to take care of those basics, and I think that's the change we're going to see here. There was a lot of fluff, in the Peduto administration. There were a lot of new departments and executives who had titles that none of us had ever heard before, and some of us still have no idea, what they mean, what their job was. The lines of authority were garbled because he inserted a group of super directors between himself and his directors and his departments. And I think that's why he lost touch with his departments and with basic services. Now, I was blessed to serve the first woman mayor, Mayor Sophie Maslow, as you pointed out. And when you come in with a first, you have a little honeymoon period. And I think the voters will give Ed Gainey a chance to put his team together and give him an opportunity to put us back on track and have us look more like Pittsburgh expect us to look than Copenhagen, Denmark.
Okay. Governor, your perspective as someone who had to assume office as a state attorney general and also as governor moving in, what is Ed Gainey facing?
Well, I think the first thing, and I want to congratulate him and give him my best wishes. And if he's looking for a Republican voice, give me a call. But the most important thing he can focus on is he's now no longer a legislator. He's now no longer one vote. He is somebody who's looked to as the leader of the city. And that's a different position. He's going to have to say yes to some people and no to some people. That's very hard. But a good leader will tell you what his actual vision is. Forget the campaign rhetoric. That was for campaigns. Now you got to come out with what's your vision. And he's got a challenge here in the city of Pittsburgh. Because of COVID and everything that's going on here, downtown Pittsburgh does not look like it looked back when Mayor Peduto was first elected. No fault of Mayor Peduto. COVID changed everything. Well, what's his view of how he's going to bring downtown back, bring the people back, Now, those people aren't necessarily from the city of Pittsburgh. A lot of them are from the suburbs, from the counties around us, and from the suburbs around the city of Pittsburgh. So I think the most important thing he can do is pick a very good team, not yes people, but people that will tell him, yeah, maybe you're not going in the right direction on this one. Tell you what you don't necessarily want to hear. People that are respected within the community, and particularly what's the bridge that he's going to build to the business community? Because Pittsburgh is about business. It's still about business. And I saw quotes about, the most livable city. When I hear that, it's the region that's the most livable region in my mind. But he's got to make it, he's going to make that bridge between the needs of the city and a vision of where the city's going to go with the business community.
All right, Governor, thank you. The Democrats may have won big in the city of Pittsburgh and in Allegheny County, but statewide, that was not necessarily the case. Republicans appear to have swept several state judicial offices. The Supreme Court, they won, Superior Court, Commonwealth Court. So the question now is, what is the significance that Republicans won statewide? Keith, I'm going to go back to you.
Well, I mean, there was a red wave, and I've lived through plenty of blue waves. It's really now how you read the tea leaves, both as the victors and the vanquished. What are you going to do with the information that you learned from these the decisions that were made across the country yesterday? Obviously, when you look at New Jersey, a state that President Biden won by 16 points, and they're still counting votes, obviously a concern. The Republican declared a victory in Virginia, a state that where Biden won by 10 points. And when you go to Pennsylvania, look, the numbers are tougher and tougher. The registration numbers do not favor Republicans and have been trending Democrat for almost a generation now. So we have a great disadvantage just on the number of people that call themselves Democrats compared to the number of people that call themselves Republicans. But oddly enough, when you looked at all the ads run by the Democrats for Superior Court, obviously our top court, Supreme, and our two for Commonwealth, none of them ever mentioned being the endorsed Democrat. They talked about being independent thinkers. They talked about law and order, or talked about how they're tough on crime, but none of them talked about having the Democratic endorsement. They almost ran from that endorsement. And that's not lost on me also that this is the first odd year election in which straight party voting was not permitted in Pennsylvania. That was a differentiating factor as well. I think that probably helped us as the Republican Party be as successful as we were. But really, now the question is, what do you do with this information? And it's always about Washington. I'd like to say it's about the local races, statewide races, but the air is all taken out of the room with the presidency and Congress. That's what every newspaper, every radio station, every television station talks about, and they're talking about it today, and they weren't even on the ballot. So now the real question is, what are we going to do with this stalled legislation? Wow, I'm having trouble today. The stalled legislation in Washington, D.C. The progressives are going to say, hey, the tea leaves are, we needed to pass these bills and did. The moderate Democrats are going to say, we got a wake-up call. We got to relook at these bills before we pass them. And if we pass them in their current fashion, it's going to be even worse for us in 2022.
All right, Keith, thank you. Jim, I want to get back into the things that are happening in Washington right now, but as former state Democratic Party chairman, your take on the Republicans sweeping the statewide judicial offices?
The infrastructure of the GOP in Pennsylvania, the coordinated campaign, the messaging, they brought their A game. The Democrats had good candidates, 4 very good candidates. There needed to be a coordinated campaign. There wasn't. We were on the other side of this 6 years ago in 2015. We swept 5 seats. We took 3 Supreme Court, and last night's victory won't change the majority for the Democrats on the Supreme Court. We took 3 Supreme Court. We took a Commonwealth Court. We took a Superior Court. So we did a 5-0 sweep. The Republicans recognized that success last night. They did a better job. Nuts and bolts. They did a better job at the top tier level. If you look on the ground, forget about top tier for a minute. Just look on the ground and what's been happening since the primary. You have seen the Republican candidates and the Democratic candidates going all across this Commonwealth. They've been everywhere. You go to social media, you go to their literature, you go to their web pages. They have all worked tremendously. What's the difference? Support from the top. I would submit to you that the Republican candidates who swept last night had better support, more organization at the top levels. They were able to raise more money, in my opinion, and they had more infrastructure support from their state party and statewide elected officials than did the Democrats. The Democrats, who were in a position to make a change or help these candidates who worked so hard, in my opinion, didn't show up to the degree that they needed to. They were talking about next year's governor's race. They were talking about next year's Senate race. They were canvassing for themselves when they should have been canvassing for those 4 women and men who were on that ballot this time. One of the biggest things I used to preach, and I know my colleagues have done it as well, don't take your eye off the ball with respect to the race in front of you. Focus on that. Get that done, and then deal with the business of what's to come the following cycle. The Republicans this time did a better job of that than did the Democrats. Now, I know Josh Shapiro is looking at this very apprehensively as to what happened last night, because that should be a warning sign to the state Democratic Party and state leadership, both in organized labor and in elective office, including the governor and Senator Casey, that they better start paying attention to what happened, study that film, and get it fixed. Pennsylvania is already in the crosshairs for a national conversation next year. Now, because of what happened last night, they're probably going to have to put up more infrastructure and put up more money and spend more here than they were already going to have to spend a lot. Now they're going to have to spend even more based on that sweep and that resounding thumping that they took last night.
Governor, do you think this will carry over into the midterms for next year?
Oh, I think it definitely has an impact. Let me go back to the four races, though. One thing I noticed, and Jim, you correct me if I'm wrong, is the Democrats all running for judge came out of southeastern Pennsylvania. They didn't come out of any other part of the state, correct?
David Spurgeon is a Allegheny County. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Republicans were spread out over the state.
True.
I haven't looked at the county breakdowns, but I think that helped the Republicans get people out because they'll come out and vote for, Stacey Wallace up in the north and Megan down in the southeast. The numbers were amazing. If you go and look at the numbers, I never thought that the Republicans would win all 4 at this point in time. That tells me, I think, that after not quite a year of the Biden administration, but after 2 years of discussion of a progressive program and the battle on the progressives and the battle with the Trump side over here, a lot more people are in the middle, and they had their opportunity to voice that at the ballot box this time. Will that trend over to next year? I think it probably will. I heard one commentator talk about there's actually now 4 parties out there: the far left and the moderate Democrats, the far right and the moderate Republicans. I can't disagree with that. People are quiet about where they are on these things, but it really, I think this election reflected it. I look at the Westmoreland County District Attorney's election where the Republican upset the 5-term, 6-term incumbent in that race, and this is the same woman who almost won a legislative seat last year, came very close. So things are changing a lot, but Washington, how Congress, how the president work definitely has an impact on these local races that, the local races can't help it, but I think the Republicans played it smart, keeping away from any issue that was national and just talking about the qualifications.
All right, Joseph, your take.
Well, Keith is right when he said that the Democrats did not list themselves, run as Democrats, at least prominently in a lot of their ads. But, in the same tone, Republicans did not identify themselves as Republicans. The difference is every Republican talked about how if elected, he or she would support the Constitution. That was a theme on the Republican side in those races, and I can only believe that they have some polling data that indicated that that's like a dog whistle term. That's something that perhaps plays to the unfounded belief, the big lie that the election had been stolen in Pennsylvania and somehow that was violative of the Constitution. But that did appeal to a number of voters. Now, we don't win these statewide races unless we get a big turnout out of Philadelphia. Democrats rely on Philadelphia to turn out. And, and that's the way we can counter all the Republican votes in the T. And here in the Southwest, where the surrounding counties of Allegheny County are trending Republican. And when we don't get that turnout, we struggle. I ran in 93 statewide for a judgeship, and all three the Democrats lost, and it was the same scenario. We didn't get the votes out of Philly that we needed to get. So, unless we can excite Philadelphia Democrats and get them to vote, we'll continue to see a repeat of this. Now, fortunately, the pendulum swings. There's some years when they're excited and they come out to vote, and other years when they're not. But that seems to be the determinative factor.
All right, Joe, that's your take on this, but let's now bring in what happened in the state of Virginia, which has to be considered not necessarily a purple, but perhaps a blue state. And Republicans swept the offices for the statewide, governor, lieutenant governor, and another statewide office. So we had Republicans sweeping here in Pennsylvania on a statewide race. We had Republicans winning in Virginia on a statewide race. So how does this look to the future for you for next year, Joe?
Well, the lesson of this election is one of the oldest lessons in politics and life. History repeats itself. This is an election where historically, the party that holds the White House doesn't do real well in this off-year municipal election. We've seen that historically in Virginia. I don't know if it's ever happened, but they have an 1830 Constitution that says that you can't serve 2 successive terms, but you can run again if you skip a term. And I don't know anyone who's ever come back and won that second time. So McAuliffe historically, ran into a tough precedent. In New Jersey, they haven't reelected an incumbent Democratic mayor since 1965, I believe. So history was running against Murphy as well. I think that's the lesson here. Now, fortunately, the pendulum swings, and we have to be cognizant of the fact that history was running against us. If we win New Jersey, that's a big deal considering the historic precedent. But I don't think it's necessarily bad for the Democrats to get kicked in the pants like this right now. I think that I would put this at the feet of the progressives in Congress who have prevented President Biden from having a victory. He needed a victory, 2 victories. He needed something, and their selfishness has gotten in the way. And this is what happens when their selfishness gets in the way.
All right.
Casey.
Yeah, please, Keith. I'm going to go to you next.
Oh, thanks. I'd suggest that the Democrats, I have to admit, are in a very difficult, very unenviable position. Listen, the former governor and I are part of a party that have been handed tough election cycles before, just like the Democrats. The pendulum will always swing. And as I said the first time that I had an opportunity to talk about last night, I said, how do they react to this news? Can they pivot? What can they do to make the necessary corrections before the next election a year from today? Well, the unenviable position is, although they control Congress, although they control the White House, it's by the slimmest of majorities. They need all 50 Senate votes to pass a piece of legislation. The Democrats have to stay together. They have a handful of people that represent their majority in the Congress, which is one of the slimmest majorities that the Democrats have enjoyed in my lifetime. So now, if they really have to retool and put an agenda together and pass things, it's as difficult as it was before yesterday's election. The progressives are going to take a position on what happened yesterday, and the moderates are going to take a different position. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be like herding cats. It's going to be tough. But all the American people, the average Americans, just know the Democrats are in charge. You have to fix it. And until that pendulum swings, until the Republicans likely will have success next year and will control Congress, then we'll share the blame. The blame is now solely on the Democrats because they're in charge. But the unfortunate thing for the Democrats, they're in charge by the slimmest of majorities.
Can I jump in here for a moment? I have to invoke our friend Governor Corbett. in this. You know, there's something that I call the curse of total control, of total victory. And, you know, Joe Biden's unfortunate situation is very similar to the one Governor Corbett faced. He was a Republican in the governor's mansion. His party controlled both chambers of the legislature. Now, when that happens, all of your people, they're supposed to be your people, you know, when you're the governor or when you're the president, they all think that, hey, we're in total control. I can get all the things I've always wanted. And they forget about the art of compromise and the give and take that's necessary to really progress. Now, Governor Corbett finally managed to get it together with the most successful infrastructure legislation maybe we've ever had. And he needed 40 Democratic votes out of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives because his own party did not give him the kind of support that he deserved, the kind of support that was merited. But he managed to pull it off. Now, that's the situation Joe Biden's in.
Governor?
I agree. When you can negotiate with the other side, you can reach compromise. And, you know, I can give you something, you need to give me something. When you are, allegedly in charge, no executive, no Congress, no governor, no president is in charge of the Congress or the legislature. And they will remind you of that in both houses. I worked much better with the House than I did with the Senate when we were there. We all have different interests. And there were shades of Republicanism in the Senate and in the House, just like we see with the Democrats going on right now. So it's very hard as the executive to lead and to succeed when, frankly, and Joe, you left this out, I had a major budget deficit to fix that was left to me by my Democratic predecessor. It didn't make anybody happy. But that's where I go back to talking about leadership. You have to be prepared to lead. Ed Gainey needs to be prepared to lead when he comes in. And it can't be just all politics. You got to be leading and have a vision. I believe we had a vision and it was successful, but I had to make tough decisions that I knew could cost me an election, and which they did. I don't see that coming out of the White House at this point in time. He's been a senator most of his life. I think he's having a hard time adjusting to being the executive with a vision where he can't convince his own party to support him.
All right, we have about a minute and a half left. So Jim, I'm going to give it to you. You wrap it up for us.
Oh, the Democrats had a wake-up call last night. So let's take a very good look at what happened and why it happened. And every one of my friends on this panel has been exactly right in their analysis. They've all contributed variables, in my opinion, that are explain what happened. Virginia and New Jersey, as Professor Mystic said, they normally go the other way depending on who's in the White House. They did that last night. However, the question is, why did they do it so remarkably this time when the president won by 10 points? It's because he's at 42%. Part of the reason, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, there's two factions in there. The pragmatic progressives who come in passionately but understand you need to do a deal, and those who refuse to see anything but their way. That's the wing of the Progressive Party, those who refuse to negotiate, that are hurting Joe Biden right now. So you learn from that and you move ahead. They had a wake-up call. Better that it happened now than next November. Perhaps they learn from this and do the damage control they need to do as we gear up for next year. But what Pennsylvania was on the map before last night, after what Keith and the governor's party did here with those judicials, it's going to be even more in the crosshairs. They are now convinced they can put this back in their column.
All right, we have 1 minute or so to go. So I'm going to ask each one of you very quickly here. If you had to guess right now, do the Dems keep control of the House and the Senate next year?
No.
All right, Governor Keith.
We'll sweep both houses.
Joe.
I think Democrats will lose the Senate, but that won't be bad because then they can get some business done.
And finally, Jim.
Lose the House, hang on to the Senate.
All right, gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us once again for another edition of Around the Table. And we look forward to talking with you again in a week or so. Thanks for joining us. I'm Stacy Smith, and thank you for joining us for Around the Table, and we'll see you next time.